6, the standing order allows for First Leader Deputy MaryLouMcDonald of Sinn Féin.
Taoiseach, hundreds of parents are today living the nightmare of the prospect that their child was operated on unnecessarily. On foot of whistleblower allegations, an audit was carried out into paediatric hip dysplasia surgeries at 3 Children's Health Ireland hospitals. The audit, published in full on the Ditch website, found that hundreds of children operated on between 2021 and 2023 didn't meet the threshold for this surgery, and it recommends that 561 children be recalled and independently assessed. So this is very serious. We have received literally dozens of emails and phone calls from parents since my colleague Seachta Pearse-Doherty raised this scandal in the Dáil on Thursday last. Parents at their wits' end, having received letters from Children's Health Ireland to inform them of the audit. These parents were provided with an email address in the letter, but many tell us they're emailing and getting no response. They're also ringing but getting no answer. It's heaping stress on top of stress. One mother contacted us to say she received 2 letters because her twin daughters were 3 when they had surgery in 2023, and she says it took them months to recover, to learn to walk again, not to mention the agonising pain each of them were in, the sleepless nights crying in pain. We want to get to the bottom of how they could put vulnerable children through this. A second parent wrote, "One of my daughters had both hips done, and we've received a letter. I am sick with nerves at the outcome of this. Families deserve to know sooner rather than later." Another mother says that her daughter had the surgery in 2023, days before her 3rd birthday, and she wrote, "I am heartbroken to think I put my little girl through so much pain if there was never any need for it. She had to be lifted and carried for over a week after the surgery. She was afraid to go to the toilet. The night and day after surgery, she was in so much pain." Taoiseach, we know of cases where parents sought a second opinion when their child was scheduled for surgery, and incredibly, they were told that not alone did their child not need the operation, but they didn't in fact have hip dysplasia at all. Also, that parents of children who had operations a decade ago are also receiving letters. So there is now a genuine fear that these practices were going on long before 2021. I'd like to know how many letters have been issued, Taoiseach. I want to know how many children have been affected. Parents are angry that Children's Health Ireland will conduct the following follow-up assessments because they've completely lost confidence in that organisation, and who could blame them? Children's Health Ireland is an organisation mired in scandal. The controversies pile up and government sits on the sidelines, incapable of getting a handle on things. So tána céadta tuismór buartha gur cura báistí faoi obrádaí trim cúiseacha gan gá ag CHI. Ní mór den rialtas na freagraí atá ag teastal ó na tuismitheoirí seo a fháildóibh. So you need to get on top of this, Taoiseach. Can I ask you what action you've taken to uncover the full extent of this scandal? How long has it been going on? How many letters have been issued? How many children are affected? And crucially, when will parents be told whether or not their child was operated on unnecessarily?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to respond, please.
First of all, for any young child to go through surgery, irrespective of the gravity of the surgery, is a very traumatic event for the child. It's a very traumatic experience for the child, and it's equally a very traumatic experience for parents. And in that context, to have an audit now being established, a clinical audit at CHI and Kappa hospitals on the surgical management of children with a condition known as developmental dysplasia of the hip is deeply traumatic. It compounds the original trauma. It is extremely worrying for patients and would lead to anger if it transpires that operations were carried out that weren't required at all. And remember that this is first and foremost a clinical issue, insofar as these are clinical decisions to take the step of surgery. That's a predetermined, should be done through multidisciplinary teams who decide that a child needs surgery for a specific condition. So it is an extremely serious situation that the assertion now is that quite a number of operations were carried out unnecessarily, notwithstanding the fact that we're talking about clinicians involved in surgeries of this kind. So a clinical audit is being conducted by an external international expert on surgery for children with developmental dysplasia of the hip across CHI and the National Orthopaedic Hospital. I think you know the condition. It's a problem, with the way a baby's hip joint forms, and some children with DH may require surgery. So the purpose of the audit is to establish that surgical practice was in line with international standards and practices. The audit is close to final stages. I think it makes sense that we await for the completion of the audit. So we have an informed, evidence-based approach to the issue. Letters are being issued to the families by CHI and CAPA. They will be writing to them to provide further information in respect of this. I expect the details of the audit to be published and fully shared before publication with the parents. My understanding is concerns were initially raised internally within CHI under a protected disclosure in September of 2023 relating to different thresholds for surgery being applied in CHI and the National Orthopaedic Hospital in Kappa. The Department of Health was notified about this matter on the 9th of May 2024, and the audit process, as I've said, is at an advanced stage, with clinicians to provide feedback on the draft report to the expert author by this Friday, the 21st of March. Patient safety precautions, patient safety precautions again are being put in place, and again a multidisciplinary team is looking at the full in a comprehensive way of all of this. This is deeply worrying for the patients. I think we do have to wait for the completion of the audit and also the presentation of the findings to the parents, and also then to take what action is required. But it goes to the very heart of clinical practice and standards that apply.
Deputy MacDonald.
Well, I do think it's important to acknowledge the trauma to any child undergoing a surgery, but the very idea that a child would be put through that unnecessarily is doubly traumatic. And parents are now faced with this scenario of not knowing. The audit may only be in draft form, but the letters have been issued, Taoiseach. They are arriving to families. This stress and distress is very real in the here and now. And your argument that we simply need to wait and wait will weigh very, very heavily with those families who want answers now. You say that the HSE was made aware of these matters in May of last year. Can I ask when the Minister for Health was made aware? It seems to me an extraordinary thing that a year later parents are being told, and they're being told again to wait and wait. Can you tell us how many letters, how many children, how long was this scandal in the making? Was it, as we now suspect, not simply between 2021 and 2023, but does it go back as far as a decade?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to respond.
Well, I think first of all, no one's been asked to wait and wait. There has to be a proper audit done of this. And then there has to be a proper look back to cover as many children as possible who would have had this surgery, to have completeness and to do a comprehensive look back on the specific surgery. In my view, that's the correct thing to do. And yes, correspondence is going out to parents. That's important. Parents have to be contacted. What I will discuss this, obviously, once the audit is done, I think there has to be full transparency in respect of not just the audit, but in terms of all aspects of how the case is going to be dealt with from here onwards, or this issue is going to be dealt with. But it is very worrying that an audit has been found necessary in the context of standards of clinical care. I don't have precise timelines on that. I gave you the date in terms of the department.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Agus look, stochretathe tlí agus ní an áras go bhfuil tiismóirí a fud na tíre anna bhórtha féin méid atá tar éis tar lú. Cahamid done in Lecklish, agus Cahamid Torascal Cumsheach, a chur a score na Tishmahori, agus a score and Phobal Iguitana.
Deputy Ivana.
Margaret Cancorla. Taoiseach, this April Fool's Day, we're bracing ourselves for the impact of the most foolish April Fool of them all. And I'm talking, of course, about Trump's tariffs, the scale and scope of which we will learn tomorrow. Not content with damaging his own economy, he has now got his sights set on ours too, and reportedly even within his own administration, there is no knowing yet what exactly he has planned. Indeed, he may not even know himself. In that context, I was glad that the Taoiseach responded positively to my request in scheduling a briefing last week for opposition leaders to hear from officials in his department about the likely impact of tariffs. And I want to thank the Taoiseach and his officials for what was a comprehensive but a deeply worrying briefing. Taoiseach, clearly we cannot take the threat of tariffs seriously enough. We know that a significant fall in exports to the US could mean significant job losses here, and we know how reliant the Exchequer is on corporation tax, a disproportionate amount of which is from the profits of US multinationals. Taoiseach, the place that we find ourselves in today reflects the risks that your party and Fine Gael have taken with the economy. First, in failing to diversify our economic base. Our economic model has clearly become over-reliant on a very small number of big American corporations, and that's widely acknowledged as a risk. Secondly, there's a serious risk to our economy because you've contrived to waste what has undoubtedly been a boom. Our eye-watering corporation tax gains have been squandered because your government did not use the money to invest in the sustainable infrastructure we so badly need: affordable housing, decent public transport, universal childcare, fit-for-purpose healthcare, and clean energy supplies. That's what we should have now in place here in Ireland, given the budgetary figures we've had. But instead, you favoured one-off measures in recent budgets, a few quid off skyrocketing electricity bills and a tiny amount towards spiralling rents, but nothing meaningful for those who need it so badly in a housing and a cost of living crisis. So, Taoiseach, this is crunch time. And can you tell us today that your government's response to tariffs will prioritise public investment and targeted measures to help those who need it most? And will you act to safeguard jobs and livelihoods? We've welcomed the index linking of welfare payments. That's very good to see. But now is the time to prepare for potential job losses. Since the pandemic, we in Labour have been calling for a state-backed, short-term wage subsidy scheme to protect workers during periods of uncertainty. It would work like the EWSS introduced during the pandemic. It's long been in place in countries like Germany, and we've termed it the Oberjahr scheme to subsidise employees, Taoiseach, to work shorter hours when companies encounter difficulties and provide access to upskilling programmes. It's a vital type of model to protect workers' dignity, to protect the livelihoods of families and households. So, Taoiseach, will you commit to looking at our proposals for this short-term working scheme and give us a commitment that you'll respond to Trump's tariffs tomorrow with effective targeted measures to protect businesses but also families and struggling households?
Taoiseach.
First of all, ní éon árasach é seo an ábhar is táchtaí a bheith go scór na dála seo agus go scór na tíre sna blianta atá roing. Ní léon áras ar sin bunatharú atá faoi chabadal ag údarás na Stáit Aontaithe agus uachtarán na Stáit Aontaithe mar le tariffs agus cuasaí trádála. Without question, this is a fundamental shift in US policy. Tariffs are bad. They're bad for the world. They will create instability, uncertainty, and a lack of predictability in the world economy. That will mean a pause in investment. Whatever about existing investments, decision makers are pausing their investment decisions pending this settling down. And that in itself will have a dampening effect on economic growth, not just globally, but across Europe and indeed in Ireland. The question of and it's clear that from what we understand so far, we're looking at a a universal applicability of tariffs in terms of countries and in terms of goods. And obviously we have a number of sectors. The US administration are going to focus on 5 sectors, semiconductors, wood, pharma and automotive and so forth, which is having a big impact already in terms of some EU countries. But the key issue is Europe doesn't want tariffs and Europe wants negotiation. So Europe will take a strategic approach in its response. And that is as it should be. We will input into that response. We're part of the European Union, and we will input into that response in terms of what's the most effective strategic way to mitigate and reduce the impact of tariffs on Ireland and on Europe itself. Tariffs will increase inflation, will increase the cost of medication, will increase the cost of groceries in America in particular and elsewhere. I would reject your criticisms in terms of Ireland. Ireland has a broad base, both indigenous and multinational investment in Ireland and abroad. I mean, Irish companies are all over the world, and there's a connection. I mean, the FDI that came into Ireland spawned a lot of Irish-owned companies. A lot of Irish-owned companies that are now big, strong companies developed on the back of supply chains to the multinationals, particularly project management areas, particularly in terms of instrumentation. You take a company like Intel, or you take some of the pharmaceuticals, they're constructing plants all over the world. Very often you will find Irish companies in the supply chain to those companies. So it's far too simplistic to draw a distinction between the FDI sector and Ireland's SME sector. We need to diversify markets. We need to sign the CETA deal. I think you were opposed to the CETA deal. You had concerns. You were against it. And that was wrong. And our bread and butter is trade deals. And we should support CETA, and I appreciate your support when we bring the legislation to ratify that deal before the House. I appreciate that. I'll come back later next week.
Deputy Bacik.
Well, Taoiseach, certainly I think we all agree in this House that the tariffs Trump is proposing are bad for the worldwide economy. Indeed, we could be facing an international Trump slump, as it has been described. And indeed, the fear of tariffs itself is having a destabilising effect across Ireland and across Europe. And, you know, I think we all appreciate that the EU has to respond in a strategic manner to whatever comes forward from the US tomorrow. But equally, here at home, we have to control the controllables. And your own finance minister has pointed out the need to invest in infrastructure. An acknowledgement, I think, that, as is widely accepted, we simply don't have the critical public infrastructure that should be in place at this point in time, particularly in housing, as we all know. We all know that's the biggest crisis here at home facing this government. But Taoiseach, that's why we're offering a constructive proposal from Labour. We believe our Oberghear scheme could be transformational. It could have made a huge difference during the previous recession. It would have enabled us to hold on to more of our construction workers, and that itself would have meant we could have delivered more homes. Indeed, we might even have been able to deliver 40,000 homes last year if we'd had a scheme that had enabled construction workers to stay in Ireland on the subsidised sort of scheme that we've seen in Germany. So, Taoiseach, will you review our scheme and look at it as a potential way to help households?
This is a different potential economic upheaval than the previous one. It's of a different structure and of a different nature. And I would say that we've provided for the Future Ireland Fund and the Climate Infrastructure and Nature Fund, which is providing substantial funding. We'll have 16 billion by the end of this year in the Future Ireland Fund. And whatever we do, we should try and maintain that as a protector of the future and for the generations who will require access to pensions and social protection and infrastructure, continuing investment in infrastructure. So we will be prioritising investment in infrastructure in terms of water, grid, in terms of digital transformation of health, in terms of public transport and so forth. In addition to that, Europe wants to double down on the single market, and I agree with President von der Leyen on this, and Ireland has to play its role in that because the single market has been good for Ireland. The Savings Investment Union is one that is being seriously pushed now by the EU, and Ireland will cooperate constructively in terms of arriving at a landing zone that benefits Ireland but benefits the wider European Union as well in respect of releasing savings to enable investment to take place in Europe to a far greater degree than is the case at the moment.
Now we move to Deputy Cian O'Callaghan.
Taoiseach, tomorrow Donald Trump will take a wrecking ball to the world economy. His goal is clear and unambiguous: to cause maximum damage Yesterday, Trump said his tariffs would make his country go boom, which brought to mind the Hindenburg disaster, because as far as plans go, tariffs are up there with filling an airship with flammable gas. Tariffs are toxic to trade and economic growth, and America will not be immune from this poison, which is why fears of a recession in the United States are growing. Taoiseach, we are through the looking glass when it comes to the Trump administration. Appeals to reason and logic are doomed to failure, and the threat to us as a small, open economy is particularly serious. This is clear from the modelling that's been done, and in a worst-case scenario where up to 80,000 jobs could be lost or not created. Pharmaceutical exports to the US could halve. First and foremost, the EU, as the world's largest trading bloc, will have to respond to this unprovoked aggression. But it's crucial that any response is well thought out and measured. It's essential that our voices and national interests are represented in any EU retaliation. Taoiseach, trade, as you know, is an EU competency, but there's much that we can do domestically to prepare for this onslaught. In the short term, emergency supports for impacted sectors may need to be put in place. Allied with this, we should be turbocharging investment in critical infrastructure. We need to invest in energy, transport and water infrastructure to reduce costs for businesses and indeed households. We need to invest in affordable housing to support our continued economic development. Taoiseach, we've no control over what will be announced tomorrow, but we must use every lever that we have here and at an EU level to mitigate the damage. At the outset, can you tell us what your position is on tit-for-tat tariffs at an EU level? Can you also outline any EU supports for impacted sectors that will be made available? The European Globalisation Adjustment Fund was initially set up to help workers who lost out jobs due to globalisation. Will you advocate for this fund to be repurposed to help workers who are impacted by these tariffs? And finally, what preparation has been done to introduce emergency domestic supports for impacted sectors, and how do you intend to communicate these?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thank the Deputy for his response, and to say that the response has to be on a number of levels. First of all, within the European Union, we will be consulting with the Commission, inputting into the Commission. The design of countermeasures is very important, and that it's not a knee-jerk, tit-for-tat type of response. It has to be calibrated, it has to be strategic, to make sure that whatever we do, we don't damage ourselves more by doing it. When I say we, Europe, and Ireland obviously is part of that. And that is particularly applicable to the pharmaceutical sector. We really have to weigh that up, because a response could even be counterproductive and could actually compound the problems. But again, the Commission is working on that. They're aware of our views. We obviously have concerns in the agri-food area. And again, the design of countermeasures is going to be critical in terms of ensuring that we do that which is optimal for our workers. And worker protection of jobs is the #1 priority of the Irish government in all of this. And it will take some time to unfold. Europe didn't start this. Europe doesn't want the tariff war. Europe wants negotiation. And that hopefully, following Europe's response, we'll get to negotiation with the US administration and then get to some settled landing zone. But even that landing zone post-negotiation won't be where we are today. So we need to be upfront about that. I think, as President von der Leyen says, the old order is essentially gone for now. And therefore we have to adapt, we have to innovate. And Europe's strength is in the single market, doubling down on the single market, diversifying trade to other countries. And this style has had a strange approach to trade deals that the European Union conducts and have opposed them time and time again, rather vitriotically at times, which makes no sense in terms of where the Irish economy is. So we need to wake up fast to the value and importance of trade deals that Europe can do. And I think counterintuitively is the best thing to do against the protectionist or leanings of the US and others, is to actually start doing more trade deals. So Europe is very close to a deal. Hopefully, by the end of this year, they'll have a deal closed with India. They're looking at Indonesia, and they've concluded deals. So we have to really reflect on that very hard. As an Oireachtas, trade works for Ireland. If you take the Canadian European Union trade deal, trade has gone up 30% for Irish SMEs in the Canadian market. Now, This was opposed by most of the opposition on the grounds of the investor clauses and all of that. Dáil Éireann has not been in a position to ratify the CETA deal, even though it's in provisional operation since 2018. What is that saying about Irish legislators in terms of what matters to the Irish people, what matters for Irish jobs, and what essentially is the bread and butter of people's lives on the table?
Thank you, Taoiseach.
You know?
Thank you,
But this
Taoiseach.
works for workers. The trade deal works
Thank
for
you,
workers. That's the point.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. Deputy O'Callaghan.
And Taoiseach, I think you've just confirmed that trade with Canada is flourishing without the provisions of the investor court. So we can have strong trade without those provisions. But Taoiseach, just want to get back to this key point in terms of supporting workers and sectors that are impacted by the announcements that take place tomorrow and thereafter. So what is there plans at an EU level to put in place supports? As I was saying, the European Globalisation Adjustment Fund was a very successful support. So is that going to be repurposed? Are you going to ask and lobby for that to be repurposed? Will you take on board that suggestion? Because I think that could be very, very useful. And at a domestic level, what sort of supports are you going to put in place? When are you going to make decisions on those, and when will those be communicated?
I think it's far too early to make decisions in relation to that right now. We have to see where this lands. The capacity to reshore pharmaceutical in the short term, I don't believe is there. The issue in the short term is more the pausing of investment decisions for the future, and that's what would concern me. American companies have grown strong in Ireland, and this is the point we're making bilaterally to the US. They're an integrated part of a complex supply chain between here and the US. So a lot of our products go to the US for finished product to be made in the US. So there's a bit to go on this yet. I hope there will be negotiations following the EU response, which can reduce tariffs significantly, and that we can navigate our way through this with the objective of protecting jobs into the future. It is a different structural issue economically that we have to come to grips with. But again, it's a bit early yet to be sort of almost saying that certain job losses are inevitable. The pace of this is yet unclear. The impacts are unclear because I don't think we've witnessed such a universal application of tariffs before across the globe.
Thank you.
Like
Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks, Cian Corla. 2 weeks ago, I raised the crisis facing Sacred Heart Junior National School in Killinarden with the Taoiseach. It was forced to write to the Department of Education saying that it would close its doors because it couldn't pay the bills. It first flagged a shortfall of €26,000 last October. The crisis worsened. They were in touch with the department repeatedly, but no extra funding was forthcoming. The Taoiseach 2 weeks ago said, "I believe the issue is resolved." The issue is not resolved, Taoiseach. The can is simply kicked down the road by providing an advance on capitation funding, which means, yes, the school is open today, but the debt will be even worse come September. Sacred Heart Junior School is just the canary in the coal mine. I know the senior school at Sacred Heart faces a funding crisis come September. Last Friday, I was contacted by the principal of another school, Holy Spirit Junior Primary School in Greenhills. Listen to what she has to say. "The fact of the matter is, we have approximately €8,000 in the bank. From this €8,000, we are expected to pay €10,000 worth of utility bills, pay a caretaker, a bus escort and cleaner wages, buy resources for students, employ a plumber for a terrible smell on a corridor, not to mention all the other general maintenance costs, including the upkeep of our school building and grounds. The school states clearly that without adequate financial support from the department, they are facing, quote, the very real possibility of having to close our doors." Taoiseach, you know these are not two isolated examples. I know of others just in my own constituency. 7 out of 10 primary schools nationwide are running deficits. Hundreds are in acute financial distress. And the cause is clear. It was recognised by this Dáil last June, where it passed a motion saying that we have chronic underfunding of our primary schools. These schools have been just about surviving with cost of living supports that you now appear to be planning to stop. It leaves schools in the situation where they're expected to fundraise for the very basics to keep the schools open. It deepens educational inequality. It puts added stress on school communities. But the government is still throwing money at private schools. Last year, the government spent €143 million paying the salaries of teachers in private fee-paying schools and gave them ICT and capital funding grants worth €1.9 million. But our public primary schools are faced with potential closure because the state refuses to adequately fund them. Taoiseach, will you and your government act to enable our primary schools to remain open? Do you accept that advance funding is not a long-term solution to the crisis facing these schools? Will you commit to doubling the capitation grant for primary schools and increasing the minor works grant and ancillary grant services grant? And finally, will you outline what the new DESH Plus status, which is promised in the programme for government, will mean? What extra funding will be provided?
Taoiseach to respond.
First of all, no school should be in that position, and I don't believe there was a necessity to write that letter to the parents at that time. Be frank about it. I have a long time involvement in education. I have a lot of experience with the education world. And in the past, and in any time the school was in difficulty, dialogue opened up with the department, and the department always came in to help, particularly in extremis, or if a school was in extremis or was in difficulty. My understanding is the department engaged with the school, with Sacred Heart in December, that's my understanding, sought information, the department did, but didn't get any response in terms of the information provision. The department will continue to engage. The department were unaware of any letter being sent out to the parents at the time. So I would say to schools generally, you know, if you're in really dire circumstances where you feel the necessity to write to the parents, you should contact the department. The capitation grant has increased significantly over the last 2 years in particular, or 3 years, and even during the cost of living increases there was very substantial allocations, and during COVID-19 in particular, way above the norm. And again, if you look at the investment in education over the last 4 years, it has been huge. On current capital, special education, the DESH programme was widened and expanded very, very significantly, the largest expansion of DESH ever, with consequential improved funding with that, and teaching posts and so on. That said, we do acknowledge there have been inflationary pressures on schools because of the crisis that was occasioned by the energy crisis resulting from the Ukraine war, the post-COVID issue in terms of inflation. And the Minister and the Department will work with schools that are in difficulty. We will also continue to improve the capitation rates that are paid to school. And there have been other supports as well in terms of other positions within primary schools and other specific supports around technology and so forth. Suffice to say that by any yardstick, the investment in education has increased very significantly in the last number of years, notwithstanding all the pressures that people are facing, and I acknowledge that.
Deputy Murphy. Or Taoiseach, thank you. Deputy Murphy.
Quite incredible. The Taoiseach blaming a school put in a position by your government, by the Department of Education, blaming them for being in a situation where they felt no alternative but to say we've got to close our doors. Incredible. Victim blaming and gaslighting these principals across the country who do not likely want to be in this position. The Taoiseach says, well, the department was in touch in December and there was no response. Do you know what the department said? The FSSU, which is the financial unit in the department, it contacted the principal and told the principal to reach out to her community to help fund the school in December. Shameful. These are not charities, Taoiseach. These principals shouldn't be running around having to fundraise based on how much money is in their area, based on how much population is served by their school. This is a basic public service which the state needs to provide. I'm giving you 2 examples in my just one constituency of schools that are saying we're going to have no choice if we don't get more money but to close our schools. This Dáil, in a motion proposed by your Minister, Minister Harkin, recognised that there was chronic underfunding of our primary schools. You now seem to be stepping back from that acknowledgement. The answer is not to victim blame the principals, not to victim blame the schools, provide proper funding for our primary schools so they're not placed in this situation.
Deputy, we have an awful habit of trying to name, call and label people, and you do it for political reasons. Sometimes I question your sincerity in relation to these matters, because a letter was sent. I'm just saying what happened. Okay? I'm not victim blaming anybody. And I was making a general message. I've been through this before with schools, and we help schools when they engage with the department. It has happened, different times, different school might be in a particular problem. A letter was sent to the chair of the board on the 14th of March outlining the importance of the role of the SSU, that's the Financial Support Services Unit. It's there for a reason, on behalf of the department in supporting the school. The department has engaged with the school since December, has asked the school to provide further information about the school's financial situations, which says here, which it is still, we may have got it since. We'd urge the school and the manager to engage fully with the department. It's currently, engaging with that unit for this purpose. It did, as you say, got to deal with the immediate cash flow issues. A capitation grant funding due to be paid to the school was advanced. And I've no doubt that the department will be in a position to resolve those issues for the school in a sensible way. And that's how to do things. That's all I'm simply saying. I'm not victim blaming anybody, but I would make the point, Deputy, that, every child attending that school now has free primary school books, which they never had before. Right? Because the last government took really decisive decisions on making life better for kids in all schools. Hot school meals is another initiative that was taken. But you ignore all of that and you kind of make assertions of sort of neglect or whatever, which is not the case.
In accordance with standing